Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Rising Star Leadership Conversations webinar. We're a little bit late, I know, apologies for that, but we've started now. Nice to see the numbers are still creeping up, so again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting our Leadership Conversations series. This is our third, as I'm sure I recognize some of the names in the chat already, so I'm sure many of you have seen how we work and seen how we do this. For those of you that don't, Rising Star is our program that recognizes the most talented young professionals across South Africa, and it gives them a platform to connect and to rise. We also run the Grad Star program, which recognizes the most employable tertiary level students across South Africa. I see there's quite a few of you here today as well, so welcome. One of our features of the Leadership Conversation series is the give back offer from these top leaders. It's inspiring and amazing to see these busy people donate their time to give back to the next generation. And for that, I would like to kindly thank our guest speaker today, Jacques, the founding partner and group executive of MNC SAATCHI ABEL South Africa, one of the country's leading media and advertising agencies. Jacques very kindly joined us as a judge at this year's Rising Star finalist interviews. And he's just mentioned now that he was so impressed at the quality of the young talent out there, that's you guys, that he's agreed not only to share some of his insights in this webinar, but he's also joined the plethora of leaders who are heeding the call and offering 1 hour of their time to give some mentorship and some give back and some advice to one of you here in the room today. So make sure you bring your A game, make sure you're the one to be noticed, stand up, show up, comment, question, take your chance. When, again, will you have the chance to access some of this leadership insight? So take it. Watch out on social media for the announcement over the next few days as to who's won the mentorship prize. We will go through the entire chat log, we will go through all of the attendance, and we'll pick, in conjunction with Jacques, who has won, and then we shall let you know first, and we'll do a big announcement on social media. So please feel free to comment on across our channels, hashtag Rising Star 2020. Now on to the theme of what we're doing today. I'm sure we can all agree that leadership is challenging at the best of times, but now in the time of COVID, I think this is especially true. I think this is where lessons are learned, icons are born. There isn't a blueprint here. No one's trodden this path before. We're all just doing the very best we can in uncertain times. So we'd welcome Jacques and thank you for reaching out to these young people in these uncertain times. Another part of what Rising Star aims to do is to uplift the young people we recognize and give them additional opportunities to increase their profile and exposure. In this way, today we welcome Joey Lahodi, who won our media and advertising category all the way back in 2014. She's remained a strong supporter of Rising Star throughout the years, and we're very grateful for her support. And today she will be the one posing the questions to Jacques about leadership in the time of COVID, about how this pandemic has forced the hand of many leaders, about what lessons can be learned from it, and about how we can all learn from this going forwards. Once Joey has conducted the interview, I'll come back to manage the Q&A. If I don't get to your question, we will try and address it at a later date. And everyone, please don't forget, let's keep the social media going. So on that note, I would like to welcome Joey. I would like to welcome Jacques. Please come up onto stage and let's start this interview. Hi, Jacques. Hi, Joey.
Hi, Laura.
It's like a tango for Jacques and Joey. But I can with you. Enjoy, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. And hi again, Jacques. I would like to first thank Black Bark and the team and Rising Star for giving me this opportunity. It really is an honor, Jacques, to be having a conversation with you. I feel very honored.
Thank you, Joey. It's great to be here. Looking forward to our chat.
Absolutely. Like Laura said, I think, no one has ever been in these times that we're living in. And I think for anyone who is an aspiring leader or even a leader, what would you say? What do you believe are the key attributes of leaders in these difficult times?
Yeah, it's a great opening question. I think that, I suppose if we look at the core qualities of a great leader, whether it's in a time of crisis or a time of change, or whether it's just business as usual, one would hope that those core qualities remain. But I think what's interesting is when one does go through a difficult time, or when you face particular challenges like we have through this COVID pandemic, of course, there are certain leadership qualities that shine through with people who are doing a brilliant job at leading in such uncertain times. And, from our perspective, I think there are three things that I've experienced as standout attributes of leaders in challenging times. And I think the first one is the word action. We always say that leadership isn't position, leadership is action. And I think, during tough times, your team look to you, not just in terms of what it is that you're saying or what the plan is that you're presenting, but what is it that you're actually doing? How are you behaving as a leader yourself? How are you getting stuck in? How are you working with the team? What are the actions that you deliver on a day-to-day basis? And I think that active leadership is something that we've seen come through very powerfully during this time. The second attribute I think that is important is the one of agility. And we know that great leaders are able to think on their feet, and they're able to change tack and change direction in a very agile way. Particularly important when you're facing a challenge such as this pandemic that we've had to face. So from an agility point of view, really where we see leaders stand out is your ability to develop a plan, but then to change that and change it quickly. And what we've seen as a leadership team in our company is, we went from probably meeting once a week to almost meeting daily during the lockdown period, because things were just changing at such a rapid pace that you had to be agile in your thinking and in your solutions, and looking at how do you create the best path forward for people to follow, for people to understand, for people to rally behind. So really a combination of being active in your role as a leader, but then being agile as well in terms of the nimbleness with which you apply yourself. And then I think the third attribute from my perspective that's become very important is just the notion of availability. I think that what's become incredibly important is for people to see leadership. We always talk about an open door policy or kind of being always on, but I think it's never been more important than in these times. People are feeling anxious. There is a sense of uncertainty, and for leaders to really be present and to step up communication with their teams, step up the levels and the frequency of engagement is something that's become incredibly important. And whether that is on a formal basis, so we've done lots of formal communication during this time, but even also on a more informal basis where you just connect with people as human beings. We've seen wonderful success in establishing leadership credentials across those three attributes during these times.
I think the one that really stood out for me was when you spoke about action and being an active leader. I think that is definitely on point. But Jacques, so what are the key leadership strategies to implement now, and strategies that will help future-proof organizations going forward?
Yeah, I think that a lot of leaders are probably the past 5-6 months, and they're going, how do we better equip ourselves for the future? What are the lessons that have been learned, and is there a different approach that one should take? And the way I think about it is I believe that leaders need to start taking much more of a long-term view around their businesses, around their leadership positions, and it really is about planning for the future, planning for the long term. I think that unfortunately, we've become stuck in a world that's all about short-termism. It's all about what am I going to do today? What are the results I need to deliver for this month, for this financial year? We've even seen that tenure has become very short for leadership positions. You no longer find someone in a role for 10 years or 15 years. It's kind of 2-3 years and it's in and out. And I think what happens as a result of that is everything gets crunched into the now. Everything gets considered in the context of what is it that I've got to deliver? What are my KPIs? Or how is my leadership going to be evaluated? But it's all off the back of short-term deliverables. And I think very few leaders are stepping back and going, what's the legacy that I'm creating here? What will my leadership look like in 10 years' time? You know, what is it that I leave behind in terms of a stable company, in terms of an inspired workforce, in terms of succession planning? And, you know, I heard a very interesting statistic from a friend the other day who said the average restaurant in South Africa has 19 days worth of cash flow. So that literally means that, you know, if you don't have a patron, if you don't have someone sitting down in your restaurant for 19 days, you're effectively out of business. And I think it's a very, very scary statistic, but it points exactly to the fact that businesses are run for today and for tomorrow. They're not run in a way that looks at the next 5 years, the next 10, the next 15. So I think a longer term perspective is going to be becoming very important in terms of how we make our businesses much more robust, how we create much more future fit and much more stable platforms for our businesses, success of the business, but also for the people that we have working in business. And I think that's the key shift at a leadership level. That people are going to have to, you know, we're going to have to start committing to the long term. You know, there's no more short-term little flings with leadership. You know, true leadership is about sustained success and sustained growth over an extended period of time. And I think what we're seeing are companies during the COVID pandemic that are weathering the storm, that are doing well, that manage to maintain stability. And when you look into those companies and you understand why it is, you see that there is leadership in place that takes a long-term view on those companies, and that, you know, not just in the 5-6 months, but over years have built a very, very strong and robust platform. So yeah, I think that's probably the key shift that I think we should take in the learning out of this particular period in terms of how we change our leadership orientation when it comes to planning.
I think another thing about the COVID-19 pandemic that has shown us is that externally there will always be things happening. Like, you can't control how things happen externally. But I want to talk to you now about internal change management. So how important is internal change management during these times, and what are some of the strategies you believe that leaders should be employing in this regard?
Yeah, I think internal, there can be no output, there can be no external success without your teams and your people. So communication, internal change management is absolutely key in terms of how you build long-term business success. I think what we've seen is during this pandemic, people were faced with unprecedented circumstances. You know, imagine you've got 350 people all working from an office, you know, 8 to 5, and all of a sudden you're sending all those people home and you're saying, as of from tomorrow, we're all working from home. We're all accessing these new technology platforms, and good luck. A massive shock to individuals, to having to change the way of working, to having adapt to new technology. And I think from a leadership perspective, managing that change actively from an internal perspective has been incredibly important. So, you know, what we saw at the beginning of lockdown is, you know, we were fortunate as a company in that we managed to prep our staff for a run 2 weeks before level 5 lockdown, because we could, you know, we anticipated that it might happen. And that gave us an opportunity to walk people through the technology, to make sure that people have got the right tools, that they're set up at home, that they're supported from a data perspective. But then also what we found is, as lockdown levels started to ease, you know, I said to one of my partners, like, you know, people up the mountain, we kind of dropped them there with a helicopter at the top of the mountain and said, here's your new normal. And all of a sudden we wanted people to come down the mountain, but people didn't know how to, you know. So how do you now balance between working from home versus working in the office? How do you get used to a new way of working and a new culture? And for us, key to managing that change really were two things. The first one was communication. making sure that we were in touch with our staff on a daily basis, whether it's a personal check-in, whether it's a team check-in, or whether it's as an all-company check-in. And really to hold the hand of our staff and take them through what our plan was. A lot of it is about giving people a sense of safety, giving people a sense of purpose, and building a new normality into the way of working. Kind of what are the new behaviors, and what does it look like just practically on a day-to-day basis? When do we carve out time for exercise? When do we carve out time for teams to connect? So it was really important for us to make sure that there was a plan. It was a plan that was agile and that one could adapt and adopt all the time. Very clear communication that went with that. And then lastly, making sure that we gave people the tools to help them to manage that change. And this ranged from tools on a very practical level, where it was about, how do you support someone who don't have data at home, for instance? How do you facilitate right to my emotional support, where we hosted a series, getting a psychologist in to come and talk to all of us about mental health and kind of mental ability in times of change, and giving us some very good practical tools in terms of how to manage that.
Okay, so I know when you're answering the question earlier on about leaders and the attributes that they should have in these difficult times, you spoke of availability, and I can certainly tell that with the people who you work with or the people who work for you, you've definitely made yourself available. And you've touched on the issue of support. I mean, you talk about making tools available and giving them data in case they do not have, but can you just please stress a bit more on how are the other ways that you have supported your team? Because, I think for many of us, it's just been sort of a mental shift of sorts. Like, people have gotten anxious, people have gotten depressed because you're working from home. You don't have the luxury of having people around you, of just being able to bounce off an idea on somebody else, or just having that human contact. So what are some of the things that you have done to support your team through this crisis?
Yeah, so I think we've been fortunate and a number of initiatives. So in addition to what I've spoken to, we launched a fund for family staff that work for us. So we're in a fortunate position that we've been able to keep everybody working, and that we've been able to pay everybody full salaries. But we knew that there would be families that would be affected, so you might have someone, working in our organization, but their partner might have lost their job, or they might have parents that have fallen into financial fund where people could apply for financial support, and really where we could help the families of the people that work for us to get through this very tough time. Even if it's just giving people vouchers to buy groceries. So that was a phenomenal initiative, and something that we're very, very proud of. On a more tactical level, we did a number of things, and it ranged from having care packages delivered to staff at their homes. So understanding that not everybody will be in the office, but just anything from snacks and a mask to say, stay safe, and we're thinking of you. Just those little bombs of delight to make sure that people know that we care and that we're there for them. And a wide range of other things in terms of flexible times, even just looking at who are the single people working in the company who we know would be in lockdown on their own and probably be a lot more lonely than when you lock down with your family. How do we assign buddies to those people so that they could get the daily check-in? Just a quick mental check-in. How are you doing? So those things have been really, really fantastic, and I think it's built great culture, and it's built great camaraderie amongst all of our staff, and just created a sense of community. The fact that we're in this together, and we really care.
Okay, I love the idea of assigning a buddy. Like, I never even thought that is so kind. My goodness. to just have someone check in, because I'm single, so to have someone check in on me, and that is so kind. It's amazing, Jacques. That's really amazing. And I guess you can do that because you know about certain lives that people lead within your organization. But then what happens? How do you give back to people external from your organization, wherein, you know, you're just, I guess, watching the news and kind of gauging from what is being spoken about out there, about what people would need? How have you paid it forward as a leader during these difficult times, and how would you suggest that leaders pay it forward to the community, to just people out there during these difficult times?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. My big point really was to understand that the biggest thing we could do in terms of paying it forward would be to find the ways to continue doing business, to continue servicing our clients, to continue to remain productive, so that we enable everybody to earn their full salary, so that we enable everybody to stay in a job. But also what we found is for people to be productive during this time was a fantastic antidote to all the mental challenges that we faced. You know, just the ability to be busy and have something to do in the day was actually a wonderful benefit. And we knew that what we had to do was continue delivering great work to our clients, continuing being productive, and in that way support all the people that work for us and all their families. Obviously, you know, helped along by the family emergency fund that we created. But beyond that, what we did is we launched a great initiative with some of our clients called Credit Where Credit is Due. So, you know, we're in the advertising industry and we make use of a lot of small businesses. You know, creating beautiful ads is a highly collaborative process, particularly when you get into production. So whether you're talking to people who are assisting with art buying, or whether it might be an illustrator that you pull in for a commercial, it's just a voiceover artist that you use for radio recording. Understanding that during lockdown, a lot of these small companies and individual artists were very, very heavily impacted as a result of them being unable to work because production processes were locked down for so long. And also, we experienced clients who put certain projects on hold. And so that had a very direct effect on the livelihood of those individuals. And so we launched this idea of credit where credit is due. And it was basically about acknowledging all the small suppliers and all the individuals that help us to do great work on a daily basis. And what we did is partner our clients to identify that we do with some of those suppliers, but then basically paying those people now for work that will take place in the future. So, you know, right now they might suffer because of cash flow or because of a lack of earnings, and a project might only be coming up in October or November this year. But we decided to do this campaign where we would identify that project, identify the particular artist, and then basically pay them now for the future project, so as to alleviate some of the financial pressure. And that we've done in collaboration with our clients and the brands that we work on. And it's been a fantastic initiative. You know, I think in a very similar vein, what we've also done is to look at the principle of IOUs, and we've been sharing this as an idea far and wide, and it's really about identifying people whose services you might not require at this point in time, but ordinarily you would have, you know, even if it is just the lady that brings sandwiches for sale to your office building lunchtime. All of a sudden, there's no one in the office building to buy her sandwiches. Yeah. You know, where are you going to get income from? So the idea of an IOU to say kind of, I'll buy 50 sandwiches from you and I'll pay you the money now. And when we're back to normal, whatever that looks like, you know, then maybe you can make half of those sandwiches. You know, you don't need to make all 50. Yeah. It's also been a great way in terms of just continuing to support the community of people that always support us in doing business and understanding where we can lend a helping hand.
So honestly, when I'm listening to you, Jacques, I'm kind of like, you're a leader who was made for these kinds of times, because it's almost like you guys have thought of everything. So if you were to reflect back on your past leadership experiences, how do you think they have prepared you for this challenging times that we're facing right now?
Yeah. So firstly, I think that South Africa is a challenging country within which to operate, and we've had many years of lots of different challenges thrown at us. As I always say, this is not an easy place to do business in. It's sometimes not an easy place to live in, but it's got phenomenal opportunity and what comes with those challenges. So I think as South African leaders, we tend to be, I think, a lot more hardworking, a lot more resilient than other leaders perhaps in other parts of the world. And I think that stands us in good stead because we tend to look at challenge through the lens of opportunity. So, not to become the victim of circumstance, but to look at how do you rise above it. And I think past experience in that context has been very helpful. When I look back at our agency, we launched the agency a decade ago. It was in the heart of the global economic crisis. In fact, I remember a headline in the Financial Mail that said, at the time of us launching the agency, does South Africa really need another ad agency? Not the best headline to launch an agency with. But I think that, we just had this belief that we could do things better and do things differently. And we said, let's not play victim to the circumstance. Let's actually rise above it. Let's solve in the positive. And let's grow through the opportunity that we identify. One of my partners always say that, challenge is your only opportunity for growth. And I think that's how we've orientated as a leadership team around the COVID pandemic and the challenges it presented. But I think we are very fortunate in our industry that at the very heart of our industry, at its DNA, is creativity. And I think creativity is such a silver bullet for challenges. It is all about innovation. It is all about new ideas. It's all about fresh thinking. And I think because creativity is so hardwired into what we do on a day-to-day basis, it spills over very naturally into how we apply leadership in our company. And it is about being creative in terms of how we execute that leadership. So to some of the examples that I've cited, I think it's our ability to think out of the box, our ability to really understand customers, in this instance, not so much customers, but our staff, and understand, kind of what's keeping them awake at night, what are they worried about, and how can we solve that in a fresh, interesting, and powerful way. So I think that, for me, basically the best preparation that I've had as a leader coming into these times has been the ability to think creatively, the ability to come up with new and exciting ideas that add value.
And I think you have really, what you've shared with us about some of the things you've done really shows that you've been quite creative in terms of preparing yourselves and executing. But I think when I think of a leader, and I think in many instances I've had people who I've been in organizations where I've been led, and I think when we see a leader, we think someone who is strong. We don't ever quite look at them as they're dealing with something personally, even that they have a challenge. We just kind of see them usually being together and leading us and so on. So if you were to reflect on a moment that has been the hardest for you personally during this crisis, and also reflect on the proudest moment. So the hardest moment for you as a leader personally, and also the proudest moment for you.
The hardest moment that I haven't been able to get on the plane. I love travel and commute on a weekly basis. So just being stuck at home in one place for months on end has been a challenge on a personal level. But I think more seriously speaking, I think one of the hardest things for me that I've observed during this pandemic and it's always been there, we know it, but I think this pandemic has brought to the fore the massive inequalities that we have in this country. The sharp divide between the have and the have-nots. And I think we've seen it play out in terms of how people have been able to deal with this pandemic. As I said to a friend, it's very easy to say to someone, stay at home. But what if you don't have a home to stay at? And I think it's been sad, it's been heartbreaking. And I think it's something that not just in South Africa, but I think on a global level is something that we're going to have to tackle as leaders. We can't go on like this. We can't keep having this level of inequality. I think as a society, really, I think the pandemic has put such a sharp focus on it that it's forcing us to look at it really, really hard and to take action. And I think it's been tough. It's been tough to look at how the government has tried their absolute best. I think largely done a good job in managing the pandemic. How inequality makes it very hard to do so. Also, just how lack of funding, hasn't allowed us to perhaps solve in an agile way and in an optimized way. So that's been very tough. On the positive side, pride. I think that for us to be able to keep all our staff working, to pay them full salaries, to support their families financially, but also to partner our clients actively in this time and to do brilliant work. In fact, one client said to me, "This is some of the best work you've done for us." It's something that we're incredibly proud of. It's not the past 5 months. It's actually about the past 10 years, because the reality is that we built a company over 10 years to be that solid foundation, to be really robust, to be able to weather the storm. It's not just that we've done in the past 5 months. It's really all the hard work and all the personal sacrifice that has gone into building a really strong company and a really safe space for everybody that works with that. That's been an incredibly proud moment for me, and the whole of our leadership team at SAATCHI ABEL.
I also think that's quite something to be proud of, considering that a lot of companies have had to let go of people and have had to not really be even able to pay full salaries for the people they have kept on. So it really is amazing. So you've spoken earlier on about what you've learned, from your previous leadership experiences and how they've prepared you. But how do you think you have grown? What with all that has happened in the past 5 or so months with the pandemic, how do you think you have grown as a leader through this crisis?
Yeah, there's a lovely quote that says, "People don't care until they know how much you care," and I think what we've seen.
Sorry, Jacques, can you please repeat that quote for us? I think I lost you there for a bit.
No worries. So the quote that I love is one that says, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." And I think what we've seen in the past couple of months is really we've kind of been let into people's homes in a strange way. So for the first time, I see people's kids popping up on a Microsoft Teams call. I hear the dog in the background, and I think it's brought me closer to people. I think it's given me more empathy. I think it's given me more of an understanding of not just who people are at work, but also who they are at home, and connecting with them on a really human level. And what I've learned is that our people are amazing, and that people are a lot better and a lot more brilliant than what we often give them credit for. I always say at the beginning of lockdown, there was a moment of anxiety where you kind of went, we're sending 350 people home, all of them, none of them will be in the office, yet we expect that they will still do their job. Will they still do it? And there's anxiety around, but what if people just, I don't know, lie on their bed and watch Netflix all day? And we haven't seen that, how people have pulled together and how people have been professional and on top of it, and how they've delivered some of their best thinking. And for me, that's been incredibly inspirational. So, for me, the growth as a leader has come through more empathy, through being more trusting of people, and also looking at how we find more ways to celebrate our people. I've truly developed newfound respect for the talent that we have in the agency, and the amazing people that we have, and what we're capable of, not just as a company, but on an individual level. And that gives me great hope, and it excites me, because I know that we can continue to grow, and we can do more, and we can do better. than perhaps we ever thought possible before.
I do agree. I think this time has been quite revealing. Just that people have lives. When we at work, we just kind of see people working and so on. But when you see people's children popping up, you realize, they have families, and so on. And so I think that the makings of a good leader is always to look back and learn lessons from whatever challenges you're going through. So for you, what is or are some of the important lessons you have learned as a leader?
Yeah, there are two two that really stand out for me. The first one is a quote that I saw a couple of years ago from the jewelry designer Kirsten Goss. I don't know if it's her quote or if she's just appropriated it and claimed it as her own. I've claimed it as my own, and it says, "Never take a no from someone who doesn't have the permission to give you a yes." So never accept no from someone who doesn't have the mandate to say yes. And I think that talks to, when you're building a business as a leader, when you're in the entrepreneurial space, you come across lots of stumbling blocks and challenges on a daily basis, lots of doors being shut in your face. And I think it's about applying the relentless spirit of God. I know what I'm doing is good, and I know I've got value to add. And it's about finding that person that's going to say yes, and not stopping at the person that says no. Our chief founder, Mike ABEL, always says, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you get to kiss the prince, or before one of them turns into a prince. And I think that talks to the hardship and the learnings of going on an entrepreneurial journey where you are growing your company, where you are growing your business. It is about not giving up. It is about that relentless pursuit of what it is that you believe in. What you know is gonna fire you up, is gonna excite you, and it's about a deep-seated self-belief and confidence in your own ability, and not to be sidetracked by what's happening around you. And I think we've seen that during this pandemic. It's very easy to fall victim. It's very easy to sit back and go, "Oh wow, look at what's happened to me. Look at what's happened to my company. Look at the hardship I've suffered. This isn't fair. This isn't right." And to kind of go into a downward spiral. There's really looking at it saying, no, keep pushing, keep going. And I think it ties into the second thought which our head of strategy, Robert Grace, always talks to. He talks about solving in the positive. And I love that sentiment. I love the fact that, it is about how do you solve through a positive lens, through a positive energy? How do you look at improving the situation? So yes, there might be a challenge in front of you, but it's not staring yourself blind against the negative. It's about how do you solve it, but doing it in a way that generates positive energy, that generates a positive sentiment, because I think that's what gives you that momentum that you need to progress and to grow as a leader.
Okay. You spoke earlier on about an anxiety that was felt just before we went on lockdown, and you were saying you would have to have 300 people go home and work from home and so on. But I think what that has shown, like you said, is that you are able to trust the people that work for you. And you reflected earlier on again about how really nobody knows what the new normal is going to be. But if you were, to gauge or even take a guess, like, a calculated guess, how would you say a new normal is going to look like in a world post COVID-19?
Yeah. So you're the first person asking, and in fact, internally as a leadership team and as a broader company across our employees to understand what could this new normal be. I think the first thing we did was to shift the language and to start talking about new normal, and to start talking about better normal. Because I think that new normal talks to different. And how is it going to be different? I don't think anybody knows. Some people say, the world has changed forever. There's an article I read in The Economist that says it's probably a 90-10 principle. As soon as we get a vaccine, 90% of our behavior will go back to the way it was. 10% will probably change. And no one can really tell you what that 10% is. But we love the idea of working around this notion of a better normal. What does that look like? What are the learnings that we can take out of this particular time and say, let's construct a new tomorrow, but not one that isn't new, but one that is actually better? Let that be the filter. And what could that look like? And I think that it's kind of work in progress. So we haven't got all the answers, but I think that there are a couple of thoughts that are worth landing. The one is, I think that better normal is going to be focused far more on output than on input. And I think we've come from historic behavior that's been absolutely obsessed with input. How many hours a day do you work? Are you at your desk 8 o'clock in the morning? And people would say, oh, what have you actually delivered? So historically, there's been a big focus on that. And I think what we've seen, we've kind of been liberated by lockdown and people working remote, because, as I said, all of a sudden, I don't know how many hours you're working because you're not clocking in.
Yes.
I can't see you at 2:30 in the afternoon. I don't know if you're back from lunch or not. So what becomes important is, what are your outputs? What is it you deliver? And what's the value of that delivery? And I think that's an important shift, and I think it's a brilliant shift, because I think it's going to put the focus where it should be, which is about the value that we deliver in the work that we do versus just the time that we spend. I think the other thing that we absolutely know, and the world has seen this historically, be it a depression, be it a world war, out of these things do come massive change and opportunity for innovation. We've seen a steep curve in digital adoption. All of a sudden, people are much more comfortable across platforms, be it to have a meeting, be it to have a webinar, be it just to utilize e-commerce to buy some groceries for the week. And I think we're going to see some big shifts in the space of technology and how people use it, which I think is fantastic. I think it's going to bring about better work-life balance. I think you'll see fewer people in traffic, less commuting time, a less polluted world. So all those things are really important. But I think that the key thing that we see coming out of a better normal really is, we're going to have to find a way as leadership in companies across this country to give a more powerful voice to diversity. I spoke earlier about inequality, but I think that what we've seen during this time is, if you look at the rise of movements like Black Lives Matter or #MeToo, and it all talks to inequality. I think diversity and celebrating diversity within a company, within leadership team, is something that's going to become massively important. It already is important. It always has been. It should have been taken much more seriously than what a lot of people have historically. And I think that there we see big focus in terms of what this better normal would look like and should look like. And I think we all have to find, as companies, as leaders, and as individuals, we've got to find ways of closing the inequality gap in a much more sustainable way. We've got to look at how we start to play a more meaningful role in our communities, how we pull people together, and how we really create sustainable and healthy living and meaningful living for everybody in our community, versus just maintaining the divide. And I think leaders who can drive that agenda as part of a better normal are ones that are going to thrive, and will see their company thrive in the future.
I definitely agree with you. I think also when you talk about measuring output instead of that someone came to work at a certain time, I think there was an assumption before this that when you're sitting at your desk, you're actually doing work. When you can actually, people can sit and actually not do much. But now when you're measuring someone on output, it actually makes much more sense when you think about it. So, Jacques, yes. So can you share with us who or what inspires you?
Oh my goodness, there are inspirations all around us. There's so many things. I suppose I'm always inspired by people who do exceptional things. And I say that You know, people who do exceptional things are people who operate at a world-class level. And there's so many different examples, you know, whether it's the late Zaha Hadid with the architecture that she's done, and phenomenally creative buildings, whether it's the way that Black Coffee gets a dance floor moving, and you know, that's with one hand, you know, that talks to exceptional talent and creativity. Mary Sabande's art, I find inspirational because I think it ignites conversation. It's not just something of beauty. When you look at the late Nelson Mandela's ability to serve as a leader in such a selfless way, that's inspiration. You know, it's all around us. It's nature. It's the ocean. I'm inspired by Google. Google is amazing.
How do you mean Google?
Well, I think that, you know, when I talk about exceptional, I think it's about people doing things that change the world, that change the way people behave, that change the way people do things, that somehow move you, whether it's art, whether it's architecture, whether it's a great piece of design. I mean, I'm working with a designer at the moment who's inspiring me because I think he's just genius in his work, and because it gets you to think differently. It gets you to put a filter on the world and see it differently. And I suppose Google is a quick example of that, because, you know, it's got to be different. It's changed the world in terms of how we've shifted from an era where kind of knowledge or information rather was king. It's no longer the case. Knowledge and information is easily available. You know, it's now become much more about insight. So I think it is people who shift thinking. You know, Elon Musk. Don't know if he still likes being referred to as a Josie kid, but you know, you look at what he's done with Tesla. You know, that's changing mobility. It's changing the way the world is looking at automotive. Those bold, innovative, creative pioneers are the people that inspire me.
I think this whole conversation has been inspiring for me and anybody watching. You've just been an inspiration. But Jacques, if in closing you were to share words of advice to any future leaders, anybody wanting to get into leadership and lead people, lead an organization, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah. So I think truly following. So, you know, if you're a true leader, you will have a following. You can't force people to subscribe to your leadership. If you're doing that, you're a dictator. That's the only person that can force a following, and nobody wants that. So, you know, if you're a true leader, people follow you, and you have to do something to earn that. Spoke earlier about, you know, leadership is not position, it's behavior, it's what you do. But I do think that different leaders have different X factors. You know, they have something that they're very good at, something that makes them very special. And my advice to future leaders would be to figure out what your X factor is. What is that thing that makes you unique? What is that thing that you can use to inspire others? How do you use it to serve other people? How can you use it to make them better? And if you can figure out what that is, work really, really hard at it, because leadership is not the flick of a switch. I also don't believe you're born a leader. You know, it's something that you've got to work at. As I always say, leadership is work in progress. But if you keep at it, and you keep developing that X factor, and you keep serving the people that work with you and that you engage with on a day-to-day basis, I think that's what is ultimately going to unlock following. And then before you know it, one day you're just a leader. There isn't a moment where you kind of go up.
Yes.
It just happens, right? And not to be too hard on yourselves. You know, we all get it wrong. We make mistakes. You know, I make mistakes every single day. We're not perfect, and I think one of the great traits of a brilliant leader is someone who is still willing to listen and still able to take learnings on and you know, be tough on yourself, you know, so that you continue to grow. It's always work in progress. You can always learn, and I think just to remember that as a leader, you're there to serve people ultimately, not the other way around.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful, Jacques. So we've come to the end of our conversation.
So,
I know. I really enjoyed talking to you, Jacques. Thank you so much for your time. I think Laura will be taking over from now.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joey.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joey. That was awesome.
Thank you, Laura.
You definitely belong this side of the camera, Joey.
Okay.
Jacques, thank you very much. I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the chat, but it's been going absolutely crazy. Firstly, just the amount of inspiration, your ideas. The chat log is one thing I've taken from the chat log. Your managing and leadership skills are amazing. They love your IOU idea. They're high EQ. They say they're learning so much. They're inspired. So anyway, there's a bit of congratulations on an awesome webinar. So thank you for that. But I think your authenticity as a leader is coming through. So I've been making notes. My team have been sending me questions. I think we'll start with an easy one. Do you have any leadership resources that you refer to or that you could recommend to these future leaders out there?
So I'm very, very privileged in that I work within a big leadership team of partners who are all unbelievable and amazing individuals, and I learn from them every day. You know, I think that when you see leadership in practice, it's the best way. When you're in the presentation, when you're in the boardroom, when you're having the meeting, and you with your peers. So I also think that you know, we're very fortunate in that we have exceptional young people and a very diverse group of young people in our company, and I'm always inspired by them, and I'm always learning from them. You know, then of course, I suppose from a more formal perspective, you know, I love reading about entrepreneurs. I love reading about, you know, the likes of Elon Musk, you know, love him or hate him, or Phil Knight from Nike. You know, I think those stories really inspire me. And if you look at how they've overcome challenge, you know, really, really fantastic opportunities to learn and to grow.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, love or hate these leaders, there's no doubt that they are leaders, and they have a story to tell and lessons we can learn from.
Yeah, I always you've got to decide what you want to take from something. You know, I always say, like, if you subscribe to you know to an individual, or if you read their story, or you know, on ownership, you know, I think that it is about what you want to take out of it. You know, and you don't have to follow one model slavishly, because I don't think there's not a one size fits all. You know, it's not, leadership's not paint by numbers. You've got to find your own unique style. But it is about looking at the people around you and the people that you look up to and going, you know, what are those learnings? And sometimes what are some of the, I love this notion of life hacks, you know, and I think there's some leadership hacks where you kind of go, you know, what are some of the quick wins that I can take on board for myself, and start applying and test and learn in my leadership style. But it's not about changing your leadership style to mirror someone else's. You've got to find your own distinctive voice.
I really like that concept. It's about remaining authentic to your values, authentic to yourself, but actually there's the quick wins. I love it. I've never heard it expressed that way before, but it's so accurate. And the other thing I've never heard expressed before is the better normal. So I've really taken that away. Everyone's talking about the new normal, but that's just something I wanted to comment on about a personal takeaway. On the theme of leadership, though, quite an interesting question came up. How can I continue to inspire as a leader when I'm not okay, on the days that I'm not feeling great, and on the days where I struggle to be positive? How do I continue to be an inspiration for my team?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it is incredibly tough, because I always say that as a leader, you know, when you're standing up in front of a team of people, you've got to exude positivity. You've got to exude that energy. You know, if you are not in a positive frame of mind, how can you expect that other people, you know, kind of will go there and will take on that energy? So It's a very, very tricky balance, because it comes back to that word you've used, authenticity. So you can't fake it. And I think sometimes it is important to show vulnerability. Sometimes it is important as a leader to go, I'm not sure. And I think that's what builds partnership, and what is ultimately what builds support. There is no easy answer. I do believe, though, that there are some people that you should find in your company or outside of your company that are kind of your confidants. That you can use, because sometimes we all need to vent. Sometimes we all need to offload. But I think one's got to be respectful as to who you do that to and who you do that with, because people who follow you look to you for leadership. They look to you for solution. They don't look to you to say, I don't know what to do next. That's not. But sometimes you don't know what to do next, and that's where I think partnership becomes very powerful. We've got incredible partnerships within our agency, and that is what allows you to walk into someone's office and go, I'm having a really, really bad day, and I'm feeling really down on life. And I think what's brilliant about partnerships is, it kind of works like this. It's a bit of yin and yang. And so when you're down, you have a partner that lifts you up and goes, come on, Jacques, it'll be okay. Have you thought about this? So I think that's the one part of the answer. The other part of the answer is that, not to get down on yourself for too long. And I think it talks to the principle that I spoke to earlier around solving in the positive. We all have a moment, but I think leadership, true leadership, is the ability to pick yourself up from that moment and not stay there for too long. So we can all have our off day, and that's okay. And maybe it is then looking at, how do you engage or not engage with people on that day where you're not feeling great? How do you seek some support with partners, with friends, with colleagues? In a more intimate way. But then it is about picking yourself up again, because ultimately you have a vision, you believe in something, you've got to exude that confidence, and you've just got to trade out of it again. Easier said than done sometimes.
Absolutely, but I think that goes back to the characteristic of a leader. I mean, you have to demonstrate the characteristic of not giving up and persevering when it's hard. Otherwise, you wouldn't really have made it into a leadership position in the first place. Exactly. I know what personally works for me is that I have to, if I motivate myself to get on the treadmill, and then that clears my head, it cleans my head, and I can come back in and my mood is changed. But I do have to find that motivation to get on it in the first place.
Absolutely. No, it's very important. And as you say, I think true leadership is what comes to the fore actually during tough times. It's easy to lead in good times, and so that's when, I think when true leadership shines through.
Absolutely. There's a question that I find quite interesting here about your industry. I'm not going to refer to your industry very much, because this is all about you and leadership and your advice for these people. But it is an interesting question, being in the advertising agency when advertising is changing. Lots of companies are cutting their marketing budgets, cutting their design budgets. What would you say the biggest challenge in your industry has been through this pandemic and going forwards?
Yeah, I think that probably two, maybe three. I think the first one is, as an industry, to work with brands and clients to fight this notion of short-termism, this approach that says, we're not selling product in the next 4 weeks because we're in lockdown, so therefore we don't market, we don't advertise. It's well proven globally that brands who continue to support advertising, who continue to communicate, are ones that bounce back much, much quicker out of a recession or even a depression. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we face as an industry is how we don't fall victim to this kind of short-termism, where you've got client and brand owners that believe that, because right now trading conditions are tough or business is tough, that we're going to stop communicating, we're going to stop advertising. And it's not about, my view is it's not about not advertising it. You absolutely have to continue doing it. It's just how you do it and what you do. As I said to a client last week, I said, it's not, you can't sell product right now, but you can still build your brand. You can still make people fall in love with you. You can still drive preference. And what an incredible opportunity to do that now, so that when you can start to sell product again, you've just expanded and extended your fan base. How much quicker will you bounce back as a business? In fact, we hosted a webinar led by two of our lead strategists in the agency, for all of our clients and colleagues and staff, that spoke to this very subject, around how do you communicate during a pandemic? What are the phases that we expect consumers will go through post-pandemic in terms of how they reassess their spend, how they relate to brands, the role, purpose of brands in their life. It's really about kind of driving and understanding as an industry that unless you're looking to shut down your business or your brand is exiting the country at the end of this year, you have to continue. You have to find a way, and you have to be smart and agile in terms of how you do that. So I think that's been the one really key challenge that we faced as an industry and continue to face that needs addressing. I think the second one is, and I've touched on it in a different context, but is the idea of, we call it diversity of thought. And I think this talks to transformation, and it talks to the fact that in order to really resonate with an audience, you've got to have relevant ideas and relevant creative thoughts. And that only comes through the power of putting people in a room that come from different backgrounds, different orientations. They see the world through different lenses, and it's when those ideas kind of fuse them together that you have really, really bright and brilliant solutions. And I think as an industry, as a company, we're very proud of what we've done in the space of transformation. But I always say that one's got to be careful when you look at transformation as just a BEE score. For me, it really talks to how you land, for us as an industry, much more powerful, much more relevant ideas. And that talks to the principle of diversity of thought. And it's something that we've been working on very hard over the past decade. I think what this pandemic has shown us is that we all need more of it, and we all need to ramp up the efforts that we put behind how we land diversity in the work that we do, in the solutions that we put out to our clients. And then I suppose just touching on that word, solutions, I think that as clients are facing a lot of headwinds, budget cuts, lowered production, balance sheets maybe not looking as good as they did 5 or 6 months ago. I think what they're really looking for are smart solutions. And so I think that as an industry, yes, we are in the business of communication, but I think the shift needs to start happening from just, is this an ad, to actually, what problem does this solve? How is this delivering a solution that is measurable at the end of the day? And I think that, our industry, unfortunately, I think to a large extent, there's a lot of people who just play in the world of ads and kind of go, here's a fun piece of communication. This is actually looking at what is the problem that we're solving, because that's really what delivers return on investment. And when money is tight, as it is right now, the focus all the more is going to become looking at your marketing spend, looking at your communication, looking at what your advertising agency is doing for you, and asking yourself the question, what's my return on investment? How am I measuring it? And what's the value that I get out of that? And we've got to be able to answer that question.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If there's one thing the pandemic has given to us, shall we say, is that it's a time of enforced creativity. Businesses have been forced to change the old way of doing things, to look at things differently. I mean, I'm in an events business. Look at us now. But I think it's applied to every single business leader, is that we've been forced into this situation where we've been forced to be creative. We've been literally stuck at home and told to make it happen. And that I see is truly a benefit, because it's something that we would never have done before. We never have the time to do. We know it needs to be done, but who's really going to sit there and force a business change? So perhaps that's something for going forward. I see Seth in the comment box has mentioned the Henry Ford quote, saying stopping advertising to save money is like taking off your watch to save time.
That's a great quote. I love that quote. You know, it's a little bit like there's another quote which it makes me think of, and you know, we talk to moving at the speed show. And actually, if you look at society and look at customers or consumers, you know, that's really who your brand needs to connect with. And so understanding culture, understanding where people are at, what their mindsets are, and kind of what they're thinking or what they're doing is so important, because ultimately from a marketing perspective, as I always say, we can only influence four things: what you think, feel, say, or do. That's it. You can't do that's, you know, don't ask us to do more. But those things are quite powerful, because I can influence your mind to the extent that you choose one product over another, or that you behave differently. And I think that's very powerful. But part of being able to influence the mind with your thinking and your ideas is the ability to really understand culture, but also understanding that culture runs at speed. And I think that what is happening and what happens during a time like what we're going through now is that every digital adoption, conversations around inequality, you know, everything is just kind of running at a much faster pace. And from a brand perspective, for your brand to stay healthy and for your brand to be future fit, you've got to move at the speed of culture. So it's not just about understanding culture and where your brand or business fits in, how it relates to culture. It's actually also about understanding the speed of that change and how your brand keeps up with that. And therefore, to your point and to the Henry Ford quote, you know, you can't afford to stand still. If you're standing still, if you're stopping for a second, you're just falling behind.
Absolutely. I mean, I imagine now is a great time for brands to show support to their loyal client base as well. And when we come through it, I think the same can be said for leadership, actually. When we've come through this period, the takeaways will be how leaders or how brands reacted during this time.
100%. I think that, you know, by followers, by their customers, for what it is that they've done during this time. You know, what purpose have they taken on as a brand during this time? And P.S., I don't mean necessarily purpose is a very high order thing. Purpose can just be, you know, help you have more fun. But I think it is important to understand as a brand, you know, what is my purpose? What is it that I'm doing for my customers during this time? Because that's what you'll be remembered for and rewarded if you get it right.
And on that note, bringing it back to a personal level and your leadership, you're obviously very committed. You're obviously very involved with the business and very involved with your people and your team. But how have you managed to maintain your focus through this time? How have you managed to unwind, prevent burnout? Because it takes a lot of energy to give and create and continue in this manner.
Yeah, I think that probably a combination of challenges and gratitude. I love the idea of a challenge. So I'm just wired that way. A challenge gives me energy. I don't like saying no. So I suppose this was something new. I also get bored quite quickly. So, you know, this was a new way of working, a new way of doing things. So from that perspective, it was quite exciting. And I love the energy really from everyone in the company in terms of how people rallied around this new, or as we like to say, better way of doing things. So I think that's been wonderfully inspiring. But the other thing really has also just been gratitude, you know, and personally that's been really a lifesaver for me. It's just to be able to look at the amazing people that I work with, the incredible brands, being in the business of creativity, the extent to which we've built a company that's got such a solid foundation that we've been able to keep going, keep being productive, and doing some of our best work in the past 5 months. To me personally, it's been an experience of great energy and motivation. And you know, I think that there are a lot of things in life that we take for granted, and sometimes you need a time like this to sit back and reflect on everything you have on a personal level, be it family and friends, and you know, to have a roof over your head, to be healthy. Is something to be grateful for. And then to be in a business that is as dynamic and diverse and exciting as the one that I'm in, to have the partners that I work with on a daily basis that, as I say, inspire me and are much, much better leaders than what I could ever hope to be. Those are things that have kept me going.
That's amazing, and the fact that you can look to your own leadership team and take inspiration from that just, I think, demonstrates what a great team you have in place. And you seem energized by all of this, Jacques. It seems like being forced into this situation is actually something that energizes you. I do think that now during this pandemic, we have covered this a little bit, is that there's been a shift to a much more understanding approach of each other, a much more understanding approach that leaders are also human beings, and leaders may also have to be homeschooling their children, and they may also have to, one of them's fallen off a tree in the garden. So I think as a person, as a human beings, the move to vulnerability, personability can only help going forward. Can only be a positive movement going forwards. And I think that draws back to your point of communication as well. We're all seeing each other more as people rather than an old hierarchy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that it has brought people closer together. I think there's more empathy, there's more understanding, and I actually think that there's much greater balance that we start seeing coming through in terms of how we relate to one another. And I think that's going to be very positive for building great culture, for building greater relationships. I do think that there's a bit of the pre-COVID world that I'd love to see come back. I'd personally I yearn to have a good glass of wine with a friend across the table, at a restaurant. So there are those things I miss, and I miss staff parties and kind of Friday afternoon, and everybody's piling into the room for an inspirational chat. So I think that's part of what we've defined as the better normal is. We are hoping and excited to see some of those behaviors come back. But yes, there are other learnings, as you've highlighted, that's come from this time, and it's about how we hold on to trusting one another as colleagues, and how we hold on to being more personable, to being more intimate in terms of how we engage, to maintaining the balance that I think to an extent COVID has taught us.
Absolutely. And on that note, on how we've lost our social interaction, I think we find that a lot of innovation and creativity and ideas are drawn through interacting with people. Have you noticed there's working from home, there was a change in how you've had to be creative, how your team has had to be creative, how ideas are formed, and how have you managed this?
Yeah, it's such a great question. We're so reliant on teamwork in our industry and kind of boxing around ideas and collaboration is very much at the heart of how we solve. So you can imagine quite a challenge all of a sudden to brainstorm on a MS Teams platform where you're not in a room, and there was definitely that moment where it kind of felt a bit strange, but again, I think on the plus side, what it has done is it's kind of broken down borders and geographies. So we've got a Cape Town office and a Johannesburg office, and we've got a big project for the social media brand TikTok, which was awarded to us during lockdown. We've never met this client, and actually we pulled together a team to work on it between our Johannesburg and Cape Town offices, and it was just a completely seamless process. And I loved the learning around, yes, it's brilliant to be across the table, and of course, there's nuance and texture that comes into play. But if we use technology right, and if we're very clear on what it is that we want, I think being very sharp and focused on outputs have become important in this time. So I find that we've become quite focused. It's not just about having a chat. And then, really, really staying connected and probably communicating more often than what we normally would have, pulled together this team that developed an amazing concept and got everything produced and out and onto media within a couple of weeks, really. So I think it was a fantastic proof point that, if you put your mind to it, you really can achieve anything. But yes, we do miss the personable, I suppose, benefit of being in a room together. And I think those are some of the old world behaviors that we'd love to bring back, and blend with some of what we've experienced. Certainly, being free of borders and geography has been fantastic. I think that as much as I love flying and travel, it's been quite an eye opener to understand that we can do what we're doing today, and it's a great platform. We don't have to be in the same auditorium necessarily. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure. Time will tell. But I think it's taught us that there are different ways of doing things, and we should be open to them, and apply test and learn model, and keep what works, whatever it is that'll make the future better, and discard what doesn't, and write it off to this weird time called the COVID pandemic.
Well, we're making history. I always say to my team, at some point, your grandchildren are going to look at you and say, "Were you part of that COVID thing? Were you there?" And we're making history, and it's what we do now. It's the same way I looked at my grandparents. I'm like, "Were you in the World War?" Yes. But what the decisions we're making now will have a lasting effect on everybody. But it's like, as you mentioned before, taking the best bits from all leadership. We must take the best bits from all the learnings here and move them forwards, as well as the best bits from the pre-pandemic time. The one thing I do want to say personally to you, Jacques, though, is your enthusiasm is infectious. I'm feeling myself enthused. I can see the chat. I can see the chat and the platforms enthused. So thank you for that. I'm sure your team will agree with me too. We're also winding up on time. We've got about 4 minutes left. So I would like to just leave you with, and this is a question that's come up a few times on the chat. What do you want to be remembered for? You mentioned legacy earlier. What's your legacy, and what would you really like people to say once you've gone? Sorry.
quite a during these times. Let's hope it doesn't happen soon. I haven't really thought about legacy. I'm hoping I'm going to be around for a lot longer. I tend to think people start thinking about legacy when they're approaching their deathbed. Look, I suppose it's a very lofty idea, and I don't think that I live up to it in any way yet. So this is work to be done. But I'd like to be remembered for inspiring people with great ideas, with creativity, with a fresh perspective, and I suppose that tombstone thing. I'd love for people to remember me for having an interesting point of view, for being interesting to be around, for good conversation, for being a good friend, and being a great colleague that has inspired people to do better and to do more. And that's massive. I mean, it's so enormous. Wow. I don't think I'll get there.
Well,
but
your heart's really nice. I can feel your heart. I can feel the real love you have for working with your team and your people and your industry. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your humility, your authenticity, and just giving back to, well, there was up to almost 200 people. There's 126 people in the room now. Thank you for giving back and taking the time during busy times to just reach out to those. I'll read some chats. You've inspired us all, so don't be so modest. Thank you, says Ziva. Casey, you've definitely inspired us. Ayanda, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow, you've definitely inspired us. So many going on here. So what you've done today has made a difference. So thank you for that. I'll make sure we send you the chat log, so you can take from it the best bits, take from it what you like. And on that note, Jacques, I hope you have a fabulous day, a fabulous week, and we will be in touch. Thank you for your learnings.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. A quick reminder that one of you will win the 1-hour mentorship. We will be in touch over the next few days once we've had a chat with Jacques and we've been through the chat logs. I see the chat log was crazy, so thank you for that, guys. The grad stars in the room, keep an eye out for our next event, which is the BP webinar next week, where you can find out what it's really like to work for an international organization like BP, and you can win an interview. So don't forget to register for that. You can register at risingstar.co.za. On that note, we're bang on time. Thank you to Jacques. Thank you to MSc SAATCHI ABEL. And thank you to all of you for being here today. Goodbye.